In just a few weeks, South Africans head to the polls to vote in a general election, which will coincide with the 20-year anniversary of the end of apartheid. Africa 54's Laurel Bowman joins us now with more on that. Laurel?
Thank you, Vincent. Since Nelson Mandela won the presidency in 1994, his African National Congress, or ANC, has won every election. But the latest corruption scandal involving its leader, President Jacob Zuma, has analysts wondering if the iconic ANC can keep its hold. President Jacob Zuma leads the African National Congress, the political party South Africans tied to the late Nelson Mandela and the hard-fought battle to end apartheid.
Me, I'm voting for them for the history, especially for Nelson Mandela.
The ANC is expected to do well in May 7th elections, but President Zuma's latest corruption scandal has some activists seething and some voters on pause.
The leaders who are there are not there to rectify the mistake of the past. They are there to live a good life.
Here's a piece of the good life. Nkandla is the private residence of President Zuma, who has 3 other official homes. Taxpayers spent $23 million in security upgrades to this home, including an amphitheater, a helicopter helipad, cattle pens, and more.
For example, there is a swimming pool which is being characterized as a water source for fire prevention.
Speaking via satellite from the Council on Foreign Relations in New York is former U.S. Ambassador John Campbell, who monitors South African politics.
In other words, you could pump water out of it to fight a fire. Most South Africans, at least if the blogosphere is any indication, simply don't buy that as an explanation.
In your view, is this corruption?
Well, a great many South Africans think it's corruption.
South Africa's government ombudsman Thuli Madonsela says it's corruption. She released a report in March ruling that President Zuma had violated the country's ethics code by failing to protect state resources.
The first complainant's allegation that the expenditure constitutes opulence at a grand scale is substantiated.
Gareth Newman of the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria told us via Skype that many South Africans are fed up with Mr. Zuma.
At least 2/3 of South Africans believe that he benefited unduly in his personal capacity from taxpayers' money, that the money was excessive, it wasn't spent correctly, and that's what most South Africans believe.
I now present the ANC manifesto for 2014.
President Zuma has set radical economic transformation as the ANC's focus for the next 5 years. Meantime, poor South Africans, disgusted with bad services, burn tires in the streets. 1/4 of South Africans are jobless, including many young people, new voters born after apartheid, and disenchanted with their government.
If ever this government is not ready to listen to us, then violence maybe will make them listen.
Analysts predict the ANC will take a slight hit in the coming elections. And if the party's numbers do fall, its leaders could decide to replace Jacob Zuma, sacrificing the ANC leader for the sake of the ANC. And joining us now to talk more about corruption and Jacob Zuma is Jeffrey Young. He's VOA's very own corruption reporter. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
My first question, how has President Zuma responded to the release of this report by the public protector?
Oh, but he has not responded. That's what's good about this. He made a statement on April the 3rd saying that before he responds to the public protector's report, that he wants to see the results of a parallel probe by South Africa's Special Investigating Unit. Now, there's already been another probe into this done by what's called an interministerial committee. Now, the people who think that Mr. Zuma has acted improperly have already dismissed the interministerial report as basically being a bunch of ministers covering themselves. Gareth Newham at the Institute for Security Studies was one of the people who was very pointed about that and said there's no credibility to that report. His aspect to this is, I think, very cogent, and that is Mr. Zuma appears to be hoping that another report by the SIU is going to be in his favor, and therefore 2 reports favorable, 1 report unfavorable. In a poker game, maybe that wins.
And so how do you think the public responds to these 3 separate reports, the 2 done by people close to the president and then 1 done by the ombudsman?
Very clearly, the opposition, the Democratic Alliance Party, others who are in opposition to Mr. Zuma have very strongly embraced the Public Protector's report and said this is the valid one. And it's valid because her position is constitutionally separate from anything that happens in the executive branch of government. She is the one who is free and clear to conduct an investigation with an open hand and a clear mind and put the results in front of the public directly and the results in front of the National Assembly.
Okay. This is not President Zuma's first dalliance with corruption charges. Tell us a little bit about some past corruption charges and whether he may have to answer for those when he leaves office.
Back in 2005, when he was the deputy president, under Thabo Mbeki, there was a huge scandal, a defense scandal that blew up that had to do with bribes allegedly being paid for the purchase of ships for the South African Navy. A financial advisor named Sabir Sheikh, very, very close to Mr. Zuma, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Now, there were charges that were placed against Mr. Zuma as well. But these charges basically were examined and re-examined and looked at and discussed. And by the time we get to April 2009, the prosecution decided that they were not going to pursue the charges any further. But this is important. There are 2 reasons why something can be dropped. One can be errors in evidence, and the other can be error in procedure. And what happened in 2009 was dropping or not pursuing the charges. Let's be clear, not pursuing the charges based on errors in procedure on the prosecution side. But when he leaves office, when Mr. Zuma leaves office, these charges could be reinstated. And if so, then he might be open for prosecution again.
And that could be hundreds of corruption charges from what I've read.
There's quite a few.
Okay, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Jeffrey Young, VOA's corruption reporter, will be bringing you extensive coverage of the South African elections from our Johannesburg bureau and our reporter Anita Powell there. So please stay tuned for that.